and welcome to the India Climate Dialogue hosted by the City Climate Alliance at the National Institute of Urban Affairs. I'm Ambika Vishwanath, founder director of Cuba 9 Initiative, and we are a partner of the City Climate Alliance. The Climate Dialogue is an ongoing series with various partners under the City Climate Alliance and discusses a number of different subjects. On this conversation, we're going to look at urban river management and why that is important. Here with me is an excellent set of speakers. I have Mr. Rajiv Ranjan Mishra, who's the former Director General of the NMCG, the National Mission of Clean Ganga, and is now the Chief Technical Advisor at the National Institute of Urban Affairs. I have Ms. Girija Godbole, who's the Water Fund Lead at the Nature Conservancy, and Mr. Nitin Basi, Program Lead of the Water Team at the CEEW, or the Center for Energy, Environment and Water. I, Ambika Vishwanath, I'm going to be your moderator for this evening, and I'm going to begin with a very simple question to all three of our panel members. I'm going to come to you, Mr. Mishra, first. My question here is on urban rivers. Why do we think bringing together the conversation on urban transformation, movement, looking at our growing cities and rivers is important? If you could bring in a perspective, given the space that you work in, that would be excellent. And I'm going to come to you, Girija and Nitin, with the same question. So if you want to bring in something a little bit different from what Mr. Mishra has said, that would be great. I assume here that our audience is very knowledgeable in many spaces, but a lot of our audience might not always consider why we need to look at urban and rivers in the same conversation. So if we could also then address that set of our audience that may not be thinking about something like this in that very deep fashion that a lot of us here might be thinking about. Over to you, Mr. Mishra.
Thank you. An excellent question, because that's perhaps the fundamental in why we are going to discuss about managing urban rivers. The moment you think of a river in Indian context, what comes to your mind is whether it's a clean river. And then the main challenge is always about looking at the river as being too dirty. At the same time, we also look at river, who manages the river? Normally, it's the irrigation department or water resource department who generally are supposed to be a kind of in charge for a river. So that is where there is a kind of disconnect. So urban system is always taken like someone who is polluting the river. So the major challenge for the river comes from the urban system. But sometimes the urban people, they don't feel that they also own a part of the river, or they are also responsible for the river. So when, this whole idea, while dealing with rejuvenation of Ganga River, again a major river with several towns and cities on its bank, this challenge was always coming. And scientifically, the river knows no boundary. It goes from village to city, city to forest, forest to village. It goes on and on. But when you are looking at river, so scientifically we talk about the basin management, looking at holistically, that's very nice. But ultimately, to manage that basin, you have to also go into different components. So you have to think of the cities, what the cities can do, what the villages will do. What good or bad they are going to do for the river. And that's why we thought that we must start a special attention or some program to talk more clearly about managing urban rivers. So that I think the very idea of talking will bring the urban stakeholders and water stakeholders together, which is perhaps the most important need to do, because as you know, in the time of changing climate, water is going to play a much better role. How we manage water will determine how we also become more climate resilient. So I think that's the idea from which we came. And then subsequently, I will tell you that how exactly we went about it. So that's where the National Mission for Clean Ganga initiated this thought. And then National Institute of Urban Affairs. So basically, two ministries started talking together on the same issue.
That's excellent. And I'm actually going to come back to you, Mr. Mishra, about this part of responsibility that you've brought up, right? Oftentimes, especially in countries where water is is freely available, we don't always think about where it's coming from. What is our responsibility to that resource, whether it is coming out of our tap or whether we have to, it's, underground is abundant, or we have big rivers next to where we live. And so it's not something we always think about. So that responsibility, I think, is a really important component. And I'm going to come back to you also after we hear from our other two speakers on the responsibility of the state as well, because water is such a complicated subject in India. Some of it is governed under the state laws, and some of it is governed by the center. So I will come back to you on that. But before that, Ms. Godbole, if you'd like to also answer this question as to the importance of the relationship between cities and rivers, and what the average citizen needs to think about.
Okay, so I think the whole idea of bringing the urban to this city management, I find it quite interesting and fascinating, because as citizens of urban centers, I think we are losing the touch we had with our cities. The connection that we historically had with the cities, it's weakened so much that a city doesn't fare the same way as it used to be. And I see this urban river management plan as an opportunity to connect the citizens to the cities, as a way to celebrate our cities, and also to make the citizens from spectators to actors in the city management program. And I think it's one of the crucial parts of this river management plan. Also, I think the three pillars of this management plan, that it is environmentally responsible, economically beneficial, and socially inclusive. I think that's very important factor when we talk about management of rivers. And some of it wasn't taken so seriously for the past few years. That's how I feel.
That's great. I like this idea of having more of a relationship with our rivers, and I, for one, would be much happier for cleaner rivers in the cities that both I live in and I work in, to be able to do more in those rivers, especially given that in India we can have nice warmer waters, as opposed to if you work a lot in Europe, where I do, where the waters of these rivers are not warm enough for me to be swimming in at all, but they are clean enough. So I think if we can get there, that would be great. The same question to you, Nitin, on what, from your perspective, especially given that you're at CEW, which looks at environment, energy, and water in a very holistic fashion. And I think that's a really important tripartite conversation that both the council has been having for so many years, and has brought that conversation to a very wide subset of audience across India. So I'm a big fan of all the work that you guys do at the organization over there. But looking at it from that larger umbrella perspective, what do you think is important then in that conversation between our cities and our rivers? And what is that one thing that you will tell the citizens that they need to start thinking about?
Yeah, thanks, Ambika. First of all, thanks to NIUA for inviting us to this important webinar, and also good to see Rajiv ji here. I mean, I got a chance to work with him when he was with NMCG, and it was always a pleasure to meet him, and nice to meet Girija as well. Let me provide you a context a bit. Of course, the previous speakers have spoke about it. How we see it, I mean, India is growing, our cities are growing, centers are growing, cities are becoming a hub of the commercial activities. And if you see the current trend, most of the cities are dependent on surface water supplies. So irrespective of whatever groundwater reserves you have, I mean, you talk about Delhi, you talk about Bangalore, you talk about Hyderabad, they all are getting, surface water from outside to meet the city demand. Now, there is an investment involved here. I mean, the water needs to be transported, it needs to be conveyed from far off places, and it has to be supplied to the city. Now, what city does? So, city gives back wastewater. So, even if we take the norm that is being considered for long, so it is believed that whatever water which is supplied, out of it, only 70 to 80% actually returns to the natural system. So only 20% is consumed at the user end, and 70 to 80% comes out as a wastewater. if I look at the treatment capacity across India, especially considering the cities and the urban centers, it is about 40%. And treatment is close to 30%. So which basically means that 70% of this water, which after being supplied and returning from the households or various industrial and commercial centers, it is not treated and it goes back to the same river from where it has been diverted for use. And this explains, I mean, you look at the stretch of river, Yamuna River in Delhi, you talk about Musi River, which is one of the tributaries of Krishna in Hyderabad. You look at one of the tributaries, which passes through Pune. You will find the same story across. So we are dependent on rivers for life. We are dependent on rivers for meeting the domestic and the productive side of our life. But at the same time, we are also responsible, for giving out a lot of this wastewater, which is actually not getting captured and treated. So I think this is one realization which we need to have. And of course, there are several programs which have been initiated of late. And Namami Gange is, of course, one of the programs which is ongoing. There is a Amrut mission, which also, talk about strengthening the wastewater treatment system. But still, we have a long way to go. And this is where, the river scale planning, specifically considering the cities, is very, very important. That we understand the context, we understand the situation, and then a kind of a comprehensive action is taken instead of action taken in silos, which ultimately lead to very minimal benefits in comparison to the problem that we have in hand.
Excellent, thank you, Nitin. So the importance from the many things that you've said, which are all really important, are important, of course. But I'm gonna sort of pick up a little bit on this question of bringing more circularity into the systems in the cities, right? And how citizens then understand their role in that circularity becomes equally as important as the many policies and the programs that we have. And so perhaps building that education and awareness that we are part of that system that we are living in the cities. This has been great. Thank you. I'm going to come back to you, Mr. Mishra, on what you raised on responsibility. And if you could unpack a little bit the responsibility of the city government, right? In this case, when we look at urban river management, and then how that plays into the responsibility of the state as well, because as we know, and as some people might know already, is that water is a very complicated subject in our federal system over here in India. Some of it falls under the state and some of it falls under the center. So when you look at the city government that then has to manage these rivers, where does that relationship lie? Whose responsibility is it then? Because in India, we very often and very easily fob off responsibility onto some other governing body if we don't want to deal with that, right? And then so in that sense, what are these challenges that these city governments are also facing? And then if you want to then go a little bit into the successes that you might have seen already, that could be examples for other cities that haven't already embarked on this path.
Thank you. I think we are at a stage where we are trying to bring different stakeholders together, the cities and then the rivers. And as you know very well, the water, several parts of it as part of the state, several things are also delineated to the city government. But if you look at a river, a large river especially, which goes through different states and crosses several cities, primarily the problem happens that who does what. I mean, that becomes a kind of problem because, see, ultimately for a river like Ganga or any large river, Government of India also, I mean, people expect that this river has to be cleaned, and often Government of India has also taken initiative to announce large programs. Even what Nitin told about the untreated sewage water going into different water bodies, not only river, but the lakes and ponds everywhere in India. I think if you look at, technically speaking, constitutionally, that is also the responsibility of the city and then at the most state government. but you have Amrit program, you have Namami Gange program, because idea is this challenge is so large. Everyone has to take some part of it, because sometimes we have so much of backlog. So I think perhaps there is need for Government of India also to do some funding, and if you simply leave it to the state or the city and we know about their capacity constraints, perhaps it will take much longer time. And then what happens in the meantime, your backlog will become further high, because you are going to your intervention is at a much lower slope than your rate of population increase. So I think that gap will keep on increasing. And that is where program like Namami Gange comes with sudden increase in the project size, the intervention, and also developing processes where you can work fast. So doing it fast and doing it better, both things come with that kind of program. So when you look at, again, coming back, where different roles will come. So you have got for the environmental regions, even for the interstate rivers, Government of India has certain role to play, even to do some enactment. So I think that was one of the provision under which Namami Gange Mission and National Mission for Clean Ganga was also empowered as an authority under Environment Protection Act. And there is a funding program, there is also some regulations. So it's a very unique kind of initiative in governance and the policy making which took place in India, where actually you really develop an empowered basin organization. Now, when it works, the Ganga basin is very large, as we all know. It has 40 major rivers within this. I mean, Yamuna, we referred, Yamuna itself is a huge river. So I think to look at all them, then you start doing something like sub-basin planning. We also had another very interesting concept which emerged, district, because as you know, the districts are very important administrative units. So district Ganga plan or district river plan, that structure also emerged in this process. And then that is where finally we'll come to the cities, because as we know, everywhere, what has happened, we all know that cities developed because of the river. But as we keep on growing, a time comes, somehow you feel that the river is lost in the city. Yamuna in Delhi is lost. And that is where the problem starts, because we turn our back to the river. So I think you have three very important parts. I mean, three axes you can have. On one you have river, on one you have city, on another you have, most important perhaps is the people. So I think you have to bring these three things together. Now, the idea is good. So I think we started advocating managing urban rivers and having kind of dialogue with the cities. And what exactly is urban river management plan is a very simple thing. Someone comes to your house. I mean, we have a tradition of treating our guests very well. But a river is entering a city. You draw a lot of water for drinking. You draw all the sustenance from it. And then you dispose of 70% wastewater into that, or 60% wastewater into that, or other kind of solid waste and garbage. This is no way to treat a guest. River is a kind of guest. It's passing through your city limit, going to another city. And if you throw it in such a kind of bad thing, your exit is the entry point for another city. And if it is very close to your city, river will not have time to recoup itself. And that creates a problem. So basically, this urban river management plan started working out an idea where actually you treat river in such a way and you do so many things holistically, so that if either you improve the state of the river when the river is leaving your city limit, or at least maintain the same level. Don't make any further negative addition to that. So that's the basic rationale why this URMP as a kind of document started getting emerged. And in that, I think we may perhaps get chance to elaborate. Thing is, we also should understand rivers and water holistically. For me, river is not just the river which is flowing, but it has a huge system. The floodplains are land of the river. The water is part of the river. The silt is part of the river. The riparian forest. So I think that's also part of the river. And in the city, the wetlands, the urban wetlands, other water bodies, they are all part. So there is a vertical connectivity also. The groundwater and surface water has a connectivity. You have got rainwater coming. How you look at the entire water cycle, manage this water and manage the river, I think that's the solution for the making the cities also water sensitive. And when we started building up the infrastructure under Namami Gange program, we wanted to be sustainable, but we also wanted that you should get into the urban planning process. And that's why the urban river management plan also talks about making river sensitive urban planning, getting into the master plan. So the moment you get into the master plan, you also deal with land. So you deal with riverfront, whether it is ecological, and that is where floodplain regulation also comes into picture. And to do all these things, you look into the wetlands or the water bodies or the ponds, lakes in the city, how to protect them, because we are losing urban wetlands at the faster rate than anything else we are losing. I think they are really under threat, and then one has to build a lot of awareness as well as technical solutions, natural solutions to revive them. So if you look at, there are 10 agenda points in the URMP, and out of which several of them are interconnected, but we have tried to make them separate so there is a focus. And within the city also, every stakeholder will not work on all the agenda points. Sometimes they work in silos. So actually, once you create a kind of system where you start moving in 10 common agenda points, then perhaps that will become a kind of tool or instrument to bring people together, bring different stakeholders together. And 2 of the agenda points are directly dealing with community, making their behavior, so river sensitive behavior. And that's number 1, and they can proactive activities. So you involve them in the activities. So I think then once you go to the city, they start making these plans, then actually this process drives them to talk to each other, to communicate, to find out, other than government, who are the people who know more about the river. Some of the older people, some of the academicians, some of the experts who are from that particular city, they perhaps know much more than the officers who get to work for 2 or 3 years in that city and then go away. So I think this whole process also starts a dialogue to get into all those things.
Great, thank you, Mr. Mishra. That's really comprehensive, and I urge anyone to who hasn't already to look at that agenda, that 10 points. It's a system of ensuring that, as he said, we are working in our spaces but together. So there's a common goal. And so Nitin, I want to come to you then on this very fact of streamlining systems that we have had in India. We've had several departments that have been dealing with various aspects of water management across the country. They've all now come together. The Ministry of Jal Shakti is also working with the other ministries in a lot more comprehensive fashion than we've seen before in India. And clearly that is, as Mr. Mishra pointed out, trickle down from that larger question at the center to the states to now the cities. So from where you are sitting then, somebody who's worked both within the NIUA, been part of the task force, and now you're with an independent think tank, where do you see this relationship heading? If you want to shed some light on what you think needs to be done more to make it better, and then the relationship between the government, the governance structures, the institutions, and then an organization like yours, where like yours and mine, that we work as stakeholders with all of these institutions, and how can we then ensure better partnerships going forward to achieve this excellent agenda that has been put forth?
Thanks, Ambika, for this particular query. I think essentially what we are talking about is the governance part of it. And here at CEW, I mean, we do give a lot of importance to it. And especially considering the climate extremes that we'll be facing in the future, especially cities, I mean, which are just kind of on one side, there's a lot of anthropogenic related pressure on the, the landscape. And also there is a lot of climate variability and change that is happening, which city is already facing. Having said that, I think what needs to be done, first of all, is to highlight the importance of it, highlight or making it as a national priority. So, of course, we have water policy, which is last revised in 2012, and I believe that it will be again revised and a new version will be out soon. What has not been done is actually the implementation of the same. So, we come out with really nice policies and schemes, and if you read those, I mean, you will really realize the kind of, depth, which has gone into framing of those instruments. But what actually goes and gets implemented is very different. I mean, Rajiv ji has seen it, I believe, more closely than anyone else. And probably he would also agree that this is one major lacuna that needs to be addressed. Having said that, policy is just it's an intent that we would like to do this. Now, given that the kind of structure that we have in India, where states, the water continues to be a state subject, and the central government only takes decision on projects which are of national importance, or if there are any dispute between the riparian state related to water sharing, I think most of the responsibility falls in the domain of the state, that they have to drive the process. Having said that, what is also observed in case of city is that municipalities, who are in charge of supplying water, handling, wastewater. Delhi is a different case where we have altogether a separate, semi kind of a autonomous organization, Delhi Jal Board, which takes care of water supply. I think that there is a large scale fund crunch. There is a large scale financial crunch when it comes to dealing with water in the wastewater. So most of the time, they are dependent on a lot of national level schemes or the funds which are made available to the national level schemes to drive the whole process. For example, if Namami Gange program would not have been there, the kind of interventions that are initially started in the five main state which are there on the main stem of river Ganga, those interventions would have never taken place, because there was this dedicated funds, NMCG was created, Namami Gange program was there, and so there is a lot of kind of a special status that was created, and it was taken on priority. Same thing goes with the Amrut. So Amrut Mission, it also highlights the importance of circular economy in wastewater management. It talks about different percentages of the treated wastewater which should be used in a city and a state as a whole. So the national schemes do influence the way state function. Having said that, there are many national level frameworks which state have not adopted. For example, maybe this might not be relevant in the case of domestic water a lot, because cities already are dependent on surface water supplies to meet their water requirement. But still, you see that there are large scale groundwater pumping that happens even in cities. So you will find those bores being continuously used for construction purpose. They remain in the house even after the construction, and people depend on those bores. And with the time, only the depth of such bores have increased, and higher capacity pumps have been used to abstract water. And why it is happening? Because either many states, they have not formulated or adopted a groundwater act, or many states which have adopted the groundwater act, they have not been able to implement it in the true spirit of it. So at the national level, there is an intention, there is a framework, there is a groundwater framework which is available, but then it is up to state how they would like to take forward the matter. And if I also bring in the third major stakeholder here, the citizens. So somehow the citizens are also driven a lot by the policies which are adopted in state. For example, if you see the example of Delhi, we get about 20 kiloliters per month water for free. I'm not saying that it should not be given to those who really deserve it, but I believe that it is really not needed that it should be given to everyone, especially those who can afford it. Why this issue is important? Because ultimately it leads to water wastage. Because for a family of 4, 20 kiloliters per month is a huge quantity. Believe me. You won't be able to utilize it. Even if I supply you 24/7 in your household. So I think if you look at the stats, I think it's a staggering number. 70 to 80% of the households in Delhi, they pay zero water bill. So their consumption is much below 20 kiloliters. So which basically means that you are not paying attention to the water. Using the water efficiently. And you are generating more wastewater. So more water supply means more wastewater generation. And anyways, your systems are already, under pressure to deliver. The capacity is not there. And then on top of it, you have this, lot of wastewater which is coming out, which needs to be handled. And then you start the programs. I mean, the various programs are, usually they have, they are considered with a, let's say, a life cycle of 25 years to 50 years. And by the time the projects are completed, the whole assumptions, they go for toss. Because your projections are for next 25 years, and it takes 10 to 15 years for a project to be executed and functioning properly. And by the time you reach that stage, the pressure itself increases on the public systems. The pressure increases for more finances. The pressure increases for expanding the system, because your cities are growing horizontally. They are not growing vertically. The cities are growing horizontally. So these are some of the facets that needs to be addressed at all the levels, at the citizen level, at the state level, at the central level.
That's really, I think right now you started a fight with half of Delhi all on your own, Nitin. So congratulations there. But I completely agree with you. I think that's an important perspective. Taipei, in fact, in Taiwan has a very unique concept where they give you a basic minimum requirement of water per household that they have devised, what they feel like is basic minimum requirement, and any use above that, then you pay for. And it's a staggered payment system, same as how we have electricity, for example, in parts of India. And I think it's a useful method to look into, especially as our cities are growing. I mean, by the end of this decade, we're likely to see 60 to 65% of India's population living in our cities. And as you've rightly said, this is not a sustainable situation. Also, from what you are saying, I feel like there are some great policies that we know we have and great programs across this country, both at the center level and then at the city and state level. But the question is, are there too many then? Is it becoming harder for the states to be able to do their job because there's just too many programs now that have to be implemented? And when we look at the NMCG, the AMRUT, and various others, it gets confusing. And as Mr. Mishra said, sometimes a lot of these bureaucrats or the people who are working in these institutions, they're there only for 2 or 3 years and then they moved on. It's not enough time to learn how to be able to implement that particular program in an effective fashion. So something to think about for sure. And I might come back to you on that question, Nitin. Girija, I want to pick up on something that Nitin had said about the implementation, and given your work in anthropology, in nature resource management, and also I know in communication, what do you see then is the important part of implementation that has been missing in this entire conversation that we are having in India right now? And how do we do more? How do we do better participatory driven implementation across our cities?
Yeah, going back to what Nitin said about people being part of the whole thing, I think it's a very crucial aspect, because as I earlier said, that the disconnect that we see with people and the river, people just don't know from where the water is coming. For example, like they don't know where the river originates, like how it comes in their city, what all happens to the river on the way to the city. And also the whole thing about having water supply 24/7. It's a very politically charged issue for my city in Pune. Like elections are fought over that sometimes. But yeah, I mean, people are not just sensitive that someone has lost their land so that you can have this water. So that awareness generation, I think it's crucial part of the work, like making people aware, making people more sensitive of the whole the flow of this river, what happens to the river, how their actions affect the river. Sometimes people just don't know that where their water is going, like the west water, the gray water, the black water. So I think education should be a large part of this, and also involving people, like the people's groups, the community groups in the planning and actual implementation process. Sometimes I think what also happens is people are involved in the initial part of the planning, but then some other agency takes over and then they are not part of the implementation anymore. So I think we should find ways and spaces in bringing in citizens group in the actual implementation process as well. One of the campaigns that is being carried out in Maharashtra right now, it's called Know Your River campaign. It's done by Jal Biradari, state of Maharashtra, and some other NGOs and researchers. So they have come together and they are doing this campaign in various cities, in the river basins of various cities. And I think initiatives like that will definitely help in improving the health of our cities. Yeah, thank you.
Would you like to speak to also any examples from the water fund that you are leading under the Nature Conservancy that can be translated into this space?
Yeah. So basically, water fund is a finance and governance mechanism through which you bring in various stakeholders for protection of the headwaters. So the Nature Conservancy had its first water fund in Quito in Ecuador in 2000. So there the partnership was with the Quito Municipal Water Company and the people. And then they came together to protect the headwaters. Similarly, in Brazil, TNC is working with the individual ranchers and farmers because deforestation and agriculture is, they are the main causes for water pollution and all that. So they are working to incentivize these owners and see how land can be protected. Similarly, in India, TNC has planned its first water fund for India. It will be in the Ghodh River Basin in Maharashtra. And we hope to bring together all the stakeholders. So for example, stakeholders from the upstream who are tribal people, many of them have lost their lands because of various dams that were built. Then we have sugar factories, we have corporate houses, we have sugarcane growers, and of course the NGOs and other corporate companies. And we are trying to bring them together to see how we can protect the headwaters of the Ghodh River. This river originates in the Western Ghats Mountains, and it's very ecologically sensitive part, as you know. So we are hoping that this will be the first water fund in India of its kind. So we are working on that. We are in the initial planning phase of it. So yeah. So we are hoping that water fund could also be one of the possible models for river management.
And
India.
for our listeners who don't know, might not realize exactly what is a water fund.
Okay. So as I said, water fund is a mechanism. It's a governance mechanism. It's a finance mechanism through which the stakeholders are brought together. And the aim is to protect the headwaters, the source waters, and the biodiversity in that region, so that you ensure the water security for the people who use the water. So basically giving the users of the water a chance to invest in the protection of the water source.
So more responsibility to all users and a very inclusive approach, which I think is great and really required, and also speaks a little bit to what Nitin was saying earlier about bringing in that, thinking about who all that our stakeholders are, right? And not just the end user when we think about the planning. Mr. Mishra, I'm going to come to you on something that has been touched on a little bit, but we've not yet delved deep into, is the financial aspect of all of this, right? I mean, it's great to have some of these fantastic programs that we have in India. And I think the system that you are envisioning under the URMP, if we can implement it the way it's meant to be and in the spirit that you have described, I don't see why our rivers in our cities cannot be the best that they can going forward. But at the end of the day, it comes down to knowledge and it comes down to money. And so in that sense, do you think that this 15% increase in the union water budget will be helpful? And how do states ensure that they can supplement the funding that comes from the government and government institutions to work with both private sectors, international organizations, to be able to effectively implement this excellent program that we now have under the URMP?
Yes, I think this is the question which is the real brass tacks, because the idea is good. I mean, it's very important to plan strategically. So the URMP actually gives you that. And by enlisting 10 agendas and then actually developing a kind of a stakeholder consultation and mapping, then you actually arrive at what all you need to do to manage urban rivers. And manage, I will again repeat, not just cleaning. Managing means managing ecologically, socially, and also hydrologically. So I think you have to do a lot of things, and those 10 agenda more or less captures all those activity, including urban biodiversity, forestry, water, riverfront, clean water, clean rivers, clean water bodies, people's connect and all that. But the question is, I think the challenges, what are the challenges? I think as you have already flagged, the two challenges are, one is the technical, the capability. So I think URMP to some extent is bringing that capability, and then some handholding is needed. Second is, of course, finances. Now, I think they are also very much related. It's not that they are absolutely separate. Sometimes we don't even know what we want, what we should do. So I think that this blueprint will give you that thing. Thereafter, now there is an inbuilt mechanism in this. See, we have also created an institution called River City Alliance, because the very idea is you have to have an alliance, you have to have partners, whether it is climate alliance, city alliance, river city alliance. So after starting with URMP, realizing that we will need a kind of institutional, a kind of a forum where people can come and share a lot of good practices. Recently, we had a 2-day conference in Pune, and we also wanted one of the city to host. So Pune took initiative, and along with NIUA, we hosted a very successful conference. Now, in that, there was an exclusive session we put on the finances, because ultimately these cities, this alliance, the members of the alliance will also find it useful if they know how to find money. Now, some of the URMPs which we have made, I mean, these are all initial stage, but Kanpur, we started with Kanpur, and in that conference, Aurangabad and Ayodhya were also released. We are working on some more URMPs in Muradabad and several other places with several partners. Now, what happens? It was very interesting to see some of these URMPs, because through this process, now we have told them, as you have very rightly said, there are so many programs, and all these missions have very senior officers as head of the mission. But ultimately, all these missions land at the table of the city manager, and he has to integrate. So someone, and it's a very happy thing that someone actually is responsible for integrating it. So you have to anyway give him some sort of technical support. So now in each of these agenda, suppose we identify in a particular agenda 3-4 activities and the programs. So then the question is, the pro forma tells you that where can you get money? Is there any Government of India mission guideline supporting this activity? Like wetland, urban wetland. Earlier, it was limited in the Ganga basin with Namami Gange. Somewhere it was in the smart cities, wherever smart city, they use some money for the renovation of the city water. But now Amrit 2.0, there is a very clear provisioning for conservation of the urban wetland, because I think that this focus has started coming. So I think you look at all these things. But again, how exactly to be done, some technical support will be needed. But first you try to exhaust what are the government missions. And some of these cities have very innovatively looked at riverfront. There is also an agenda about economic value of the river. So I think someone has gone to the digital tourism mission and several other missions of Government of India, because this is actually driving you to map different missions. Then state governments, several state governments have their own very ambitious programs, whether it's on water, on then the city sanitation or the city thing. So you also look at that. But ultimately you will be left with a lot of gap. I mean, let's be realistic. None of these missions, none of these things will be able to fit all our wish list. So you will be left with a lot of gap. Now you look at these gaps, and then in this conference also, we had invited some of the multilateral and bilateral funding agencies also to expose them to this concept of URMP and get their support. Now, but the thing is, these people, they're getting funding from these multilateral, bilateral institutions is not easy. You need a lot of support, and then this RCA and NIUA. I think we have to create with other partners like you also, like very interesting TNCs having a water fund. So I think some of these concepts will start getting to these people, and you have to help them in First of all, project preparation. And also next stage will be bankable project preparation, because that's also an area where we really lack. Then you will be able to maybe give some sort of guarantee, give some sort of technical support in between and bring them some sort of money. But you will be happy to know several cities who have gone through very actively through the URMP, like Aurangabad Commissioner's representative was saying that what was needed was passion to do it. And we could find some solution. Like some of the real estate credit people gave them some sort of earth moving equipments. They put petrol into that, and then they basically out of free thing they give. So some of these things could be done with that. So I think the idea is this whole thing will be done, but let's be realistic. We'll have to give them technical support. We'll have to provide them the financial support, and then we have to bridge the gap. That interface will be needed. As we know, there are several climate related funds which are coming, not only from the government side, from different other things. So we have to also explore those possibilities. Not many of the city officers are aware about some of these possibilities. So I think this is certainly a kind of roadmap for us. Now, as you know, the corporates also have to do a lot of work under the ESG framework or the ESG compliances. Another opportunity, it's not only simple CSR, like you manage a traffic junction or do some gardening and then maintain that, that's also important. But now under ESG, I think we could actually draw some of those things, some interest in them, and maybe this RCA and some of the partners of NIUA or the City Climate Alliance, I think perhaps we can also approach some of these corporates, because the gap in your SDG funding and other things, I think everything cannot be from the government source. A lot of private funding will be needed. And that's also something which is a big problem, big capacity problem at the city level in attracting private funding. So I am quite aware the road is going to be very long, but it's rightly so, because our problem is also very large, very complicated. So naturally the path and then the future also, I mean, we have to be ready to embark upon a very long journey where you will need many partners. The more, I mean, no matter how many people you get, you will still need some more people to come and support you. But I think but you have to basically bring some sort of toolkit, bring some sort of institutional mechanism, bring some supporting policies, some enabling environment to ultimately make it happen. So I see that that's happening, and NIUA is playing a role through some of these alliances, bringing together different partners. So basically we have to match your technical skill, your availability with the people at the city, because for you also to implement your program, you will have to implement somewhere. And a billing city manager, a billing municipal commissioner will be really a big asset for you also to do that. And then learn further, because I think we have to develop our own case studies from our own learning by doing. So I think that perhaps can give us a lot of information how to make these URMPs even better in future. Because as you see, this we have very clearly said, this is not cast in stone. This has to be dynamic. Every 3 year, 2 year, you have to revisit what we have done, what we have not done. What are the new needs? What are not so much of a need now? What can be done in like riparian forestry? It cannot be done in short run. It will take a kind of long-term approach. But I think, yes, if it's in your agenda, it will come in the next cycle of URMP also. Third cycle also it will come. So I think that is the way you have to keep on doing it.
That's lots to take away from what you've just said, and I think it's important to understand this. The very basic point is that it's not just on the government, right? We oftentimes we lament that the government isn't doing enough, but as everybody has rightly pointed out, it's there's a responsibility of the citizen, and then there's a responsibility of other organizations as well. And but I want to ask Nitin, you and Girija about as organizations working with governments and government institutions to plugging in these gaps that are emerging, and how do we ensure that the way we plug these gaps in then is in the best possible format, bringing in perspectives that are wide and inclusive, whether we look at it from a gender lens, marginalized society lens, future lens, but also from a thematic side, right? If we are saying urban river management, what are we talking? And we're obviously looking at forests, wetlands, health, real estate development, all of that. But are we thinking about future climate lenses as well when we look at urban river management today? We cannot wait 10 years to bring that lens in, right? So a few Few minutes to both of you for any last minute thoughts on how do we work to plug those gaps in.
I think we as think tanks, policy research institutions, we have a lot of responsibility. I mean, because we work in a space where we are working along with the government, try to, help them, support them wherever needed to come out with the policy reforms, to design schemes, to design programs that can make a larger societal difference. And this is why, we as an institutions have a lot of responsibility, because a lot of our research also gets cited, when governments are preparing their own plans and, trying to, let's say, address specific issues. Now, if we talk about, what exactly, cities can do, I mean, even if they're thinking of going ahead with preparing let's say, a river-specific plan, I think at the end of the day, it is all about water security. And when I use the term water security, I'm also including the potability of it. I mean, I'm also including, it needs to be clean. We should not be just, kind of taking out our responsibility that, okay, we have taken the water, we have the water, and if it is treated, is treated, is not treated, is not treated. Having said that, I think as a part of this planning, as a part of the water security planning itself, I think Rajiv ji touched upon it, but we need to have a proper water accounting in place. That water accounting should tell you that how much water is available to you in a given year, even a given hydrological year. And that water, can be the internal water to a city, and it can be a water which comes from outside. And then what is the demand across the city, in that particular year, and whether the available water is able to meet that demand. And suppose if it is able to meet, then fine. I mean, we still continue to take efforts to reduce its wastage, to improve the water use efficiency wherever we can, to plug the leakages, to plug those gaps. But in case it remains that, okay, there is a water deficit even after importing a lot of water, then what needs to be done? And this is where a lot of these technical and financial instruments become very important. I would like to highlight, I mean, of course, the technical intervention will remain same, improving the water use efficiency, reducing the losses. But what you can do in terms of financial instruments, that is something which we really need to focus on. And this is where, institutions like us, others can help, where we can help government to come out with the financial viable models, whether in terms of water supply, whether in terms of wastewater treatment, whether in terms of sustainability of such systems. Because unless and until, this financial sustainability is built into these aspects, we will always be keep on augmenting the supplies without actually worrying about, how we have to manage the supplies. And this is where, the difference in the cities these days. And that is why you also see that, wastewater management is unable to take, a lot of importance, except for those river basins or areas which have been declared as a national important rivers, or which have been declared as a national important basins. So this is where I think the focus should shift to. Let me also highlight one fact. Recently, government launched this national treated reuse water policy framework. Now, already some states, I think close to 12 states, they were having the policy. But now this new policy instrument has come up, which deals with the issue in a much more comprehensive way than the states have done at the moment. It also provides nice guidelines on the states which are yet to adopt a policy. When I say policy, it's related to reuse of treated water or treated wastewater. I think it provides an opportunity for state to go along these lines and start preparing their policy. And those who have the policy, they can revise the policy. In this, kind of a domain, we at CEW has recently undertaken one study which talks about, it's one of its kind of study which talks about the market potential of treated wastewater and how the governance and mechanism can enable to realize that potential. And we are expecting this study to be launched next month. And this is what exactly we are focusing on, that how the existing policies can further be improved and further be refined to ensure that the real potential of treated wastewater can be realized, so that the pressure on fresh water can be reduced. So that is in quantitative term. And then also it addresses the pollution aspects, which is more in the water quality domain. I will stop here and maybe I would be happy to connect bilaterally on this if you want to have more information concerning the same.
Yeah.
Thank you, Nitin. Yeah, Girija, over to you.
Right. As you said, there are all of us who have to chip in, because river basin management is information intensive, and there are so many, there's so much of knowledge required on various things. And all of us in the sense, different stakeholders can bring in different kind of information, knowledge, experiences. So there should be space for that as well when we work together. So for example, the traditional knowledge of the local communities, the wisdom of women, because often women are like, it's seen as, oh, what do they know? So their knowledge perhaps, along with the scientific knowledge, of course. I think organizations like TNC, who work with the government, who work with the activist kind of organizations, who work with research organizations, can play a role in bringing many of these stakeholders together, and see how we can best use their knowledge and their information and their experiences. For example, the work that TNC is doing on the nature-based solutions, for example. So perhaps we can bring in that as our contribution to the river management plan. So yeah, as you said, we all have a role to play in this, and there should be platforms. So there should be a dialogue, because often we see situation where the government looks at the NGOs as not as friends, perhaps, and we look at the government in the same light. So I think that has to stop, because basically we all are working for the same goal. Sustainable rivers, sustainable development. So I think we need to get over all this and be real partners and take this forward. Yeah, thanks.
I think that's really well said. We have to be real partners, and I would say that the team, I think definitely Nitin might agree here, but I know 100% that the team within the NIUA is definitely working towards that. I work with several people within the NIUA on various different aspects. And what I like especially is that there is a lot of interconnectedness in the work that is happening. So it's not just, that the water team looks only at water and forgets about the fact that water and climate are so closely connected, or water urbanization, climate is closely connected. Then you have health and food security. And of course, I'm that one of those people that's like, let's not forget about the gender lens over here, and so on and so forth. So I want to thank all of you very much for taking your time to being here for this. It's been a fascinating discussion. So I work a lot on water, and so I could have gone on and asked you many more questions and listened to all of you talk a lot more, but your time is very valuable. So I appreciate all the time that you have given us at this discussion. Just to remind everyone, this is part of the City Climate Alliance discussions under the City Climate Dialogue. I especially like that this rests under the City Climate Dialogue program. And there are many of these dialogues up on the website, so please do check all of them out. Thank you again very much, Mr. Mishra, Girija, and Nitin for taking the time. I'm Ambika Vishwanath, and I work with the Kuber 9 initiative. Have a good day, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.